October is our month to celebrate one of our 5 core values, gathering, which defines who we are and what we do as a church. Throughout Gathering Month, you'll have great opportunities to connect with members of the ALCF community as we work together developing a deeper relationship with Christ. And what better way to gather and connect than through a shared worship experience? On Saturday, October 20th, our very own worship leader, Cormac Parker, celebrates the official release of his first EP, Amazed, with a free concert and reception right here at ALCF. From 6:30 to 7:30 p.m., join us for an amazing time of praise and worship. Please RSVP to cormacparkerjr.com. If you're 18 to 30-ish and looking to go deeper in your walk with a community of young adult believers, or you're not yet a believer and would like to learn about God's plan for your life, come check us out at our growth group, midweek fellowship, and young adult women's gatherings. You'll have a chance to hang out in a relaxed environment filled with games, events, speakers, informal discussions, and much, much more. To connect with our young adult community, email ya@alcf.net or yaw@alcf.net, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Moms, get ready for our upcoming Moms Time Out gatherings taking place on October 11th and 25th from 10 a.m. to noon in the fellowship hall. Moms with kids in the home can gain encouragement from one another and together learn how to glorify God in the midst of daily circumstances. Meetings include Bible-based teaching and encouragement, discussion and prayer with mentor moms, worship, brunch, and fellowship. Sign up in advance for childcare. Be sure to join us for our Seniors Night Out on Friday, October 12th from 6:30 to 9 p.m. in the fellowship hall. It's a great opportunity to meet and bond with other 50-plus seniors for a memorable night of meaningful fellowship with delicious food, a message from Rich Young, and worship led by Dave and Julie Raines. The cost is $15 in advance and registration is required. For more information, contact seniors@alcf.net. The theme for our next couples night out is Tools for Your Marriage Toolbox. Make plans to join the Harveys to discover the many tools that the Lord has provided to help you stay connected to your spouse and grow your marriage according to His plan. We'll unpack some of these tools over dinner with married couples on Saturday, October 13th from 5:30 to 8 p.m. in the fellowship hall. The cost is $40 per couple. Childcare is available with pre-registration. Our next singles movie night features The Shack, a movie in which a man who falls into deep depression after suffering a family tragedy leaves him questioning his innermost beliefs. Come join us on Friday, October 26th from 6 to 9 p.m. in the fellowship hall for this riveting and inspiring movie. The cost is just $10 and it includes food, but registration is required. Have you ever wondered what your kids are doing at Safari Kids after you drop them off? Here's a chance to experience a taste of SK during their open house on Sunday, October 28th from 10 to 11:30 a.m. Whether it's just a few minutes or the entire service, you're welcome to come join us for as long as you like. In addition to the huddle, we'll have 3 men's groups that meet on Tuesdays where men can connect, bond, and grow in Christ together. Contact men@alcf.net for more information. Our Spanish-speaking growth group is a time of family-friendly fellowship, studying the Word, and prayer. Join Arcadio and Magda Ramos in their home on Fridays from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. For more information, contact SpanishGroup@alcf.net. And to sign up for any of these upcoming gatherings, go to alcf.net/signups or use the ALCF app. In addition, check out our bi-weekly emails, newsletter, and social media to stay connected to everything ALCF. And remember, at ALCF, our goal is to make a difference in your life so that you can make a difference in the lives of the people in your sphere of influence. Or like we say around here, abundant life exists to make a better you for a better world.
John D. Rockefeller, ever heard of him? He was born in 1839 in New York. In 1870, at 31 years of age, he founded the Standard Oil Company in Ohio. Over the next 40 years, John Rockefeller built the Standard Oil Company into the largest company in the world, largest and most profitable company in the world, and probably the largest and most profitable company in the history of the world. In 1911, the federal government accused the Standard Oil Company of monopolistic practices and forced them to break up. To give you a sense for the size and scope of that company, two of the companies that were spun out of it, ExxonMobil and Chevron, over 100 years later, are still on the list of the 50 largest companies in the world. In his time building that company, John D. Rockefeller became a fabulously wealthy man. He was America's first billionaire in the early 1900s, and that is not inflation adjusted. Most people think, or most statistics will tell us, that he was far richer than Gates or Buffett could even think of. Rockefeller's net worth at the height of his wealth represented 1% of the US economy. Single man. Buffett, Gates, Zuckerberg, they can't touch that even though they have more dollars. One time a reporter at the height of Rockefeller's wealth and power asked him this question. He said, "Rockefeller, how much money is enough?" Do you know what Rockefeller said? Just a little bit more. Turn with me in your Bibles to Luke chapter 12. We're going to start at verse 13. Luke chapter 12, verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.'" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Now, the main character in this parable would have loved Rockefeller's answer. How much is enough? Just a little bit more. In fact, this guy might have said a whole lot more. As those of you who were here last week will remember, Brian introduced a series on generosity. I thought about titling my sermon, "The Sermon on the Amount." But I thought that wouldn't be appropriate, and it might be a little bit misleading. But the question before us is, how much is enough? How much is enough? We know how the man in the parable would answer that question. How would Jesus answer that question? See, Brian acknowledged last week, and I understand this, that talking about money can be awkward. Apparently so awkward, he skipped town this week so that I could continue the series. But it's a topic that hits close to home, and it can feel a little bit uncomfortable. And I think this story I'm about to tell helps us understand why. I saw a presentation a few years ago. I didn't see it live. I saw a video of it, of a fabulously successful businessman who's a Christian, who at the beginning of his business made the decision for himself and his family and his business, how much is enough. And as a result of making that decision, by the time I saw this presentation that he was giving, his company was giving away $1 million a month. $1 million a month. Now, most companies would love to know what it feels like to make $1 million a month. And every month, his company was giving away $1 million. Apparently, the board that decided where their charity went was larger than the board that ran the actual company. he said at the beginning of that talk, our churches today do a really good job of keeping people accountable in certain areas. And so he said, if I were to show up at my church and start telling people, hey, have you all seen this internet pornography thing? It is really great, and I'm loving it, and you all should check it out. He's like, people are going to come alongside me, and they're going to say, hey, that's actually not a good thing, and we want to help you not do that. He's like, if I show up at my church, and I'm like, hey, I've been cheating on my wife, and it's really fun. Have you guys ever tried this? He said, people are going to come alongside him and say, that is not right, and we need to help you change. He said, but when I show up at church, and I have spent too much of God's money on myself, I get congratulated. How much is enough? How much is enough? It can be an uncomfortable question to think about answering. Now, I want to also reiterate something that Brian said last week. We are not doing this series because we're looking for a raise. We are not doing this series because we want more income to come into the church. We are not doing this series because we want to somehow finagle God into giving us more and better blessings by giving away money. We are doing this series because we as a church want to be marked by the things that marked Jesus. Jesus was marked by radical generosity, and we want to be marked by radical generosity as well. The last thing I want to mention before we dig into the text is this. Most of us, myself included, when you hear a story about a rich man, don't think, hey, that's me, I'm rich. In fact, most studies show that people who are rich don't think of themselves as rich. And I know you all have heard statistics like these before, but I want to put them back into your mind before we get into this text so that a lot of you don't just check out and say, this is about people unlike myself. If the world were divided up into 5 income brackets, high income, upper income, middle income, low income, and poor, 88% of the United States is in the high to upper income bracket. 88, compared to the rest of the world at 16%. So 9 out of 10 Americans, when looked at on a global basis, are considered upper income or high income. 1.5 out of 10 of the rest of the world. Conversely, 5% of the US falls into the low income and poor brackets, compared to 71% of the world. So in America, 1/2 of every person is low income to poor on a global basis, whereas 7 out of 10 people on a global basis are low income to poor. So while we step outside the doors of this building and we look around the bay and we look at housing and how much Phil's coffee costs, we don't feel like we're rich. But I just want you to know, and I want to frame this, that statistically, the majority of people in this room are rich based on the global analysis of people's income. So hang with me as we go through this text. Good? All right, let's dig into it. I think there are 3 principles that we can get about what God is teaching us, about how he wants us to steward our things from this text. And the first one really needs very little explanation or exposition. The first one is this. Jesus is saying, don't be greedy. So if we can just kind of re-examine the context of what's happening in this passage. Jesus is teaching to a crowd. Someone in the crowd shouts out, hey, teacher, make my brother share the inheritance with me. And he responds by saying, man. And that is not like how you would say, hey, man, if you see a friend at men's huddle. That is like how the ESPN guys say it about boneheaded football plays. That is a, come on, man. He says, come on, man. And then look at what he says. Verse 15. Well, actually, let me back up. He says, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you? Just a little aside. That's ironic, okay? This is Jesus, the one who is going to sit in judgment of the entire world. The answer to that question is you did. You know when Jesus starts his answer to your question with sarcasm, you're not headed in a good direction, okay? Look at verse 15. Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness. That phrase, take care, could be translated a bunch of different ways. It could be translated, look out, or pay attention, or heads up. What that phrase is saying, pay attention, because what I'm about to say is really important. And then he says this, be on your guard against all covetousness. In many other English translations, this is the ESV, in many other English translations, you'll see that word covetousness translated as greed. Be on your guard against greed. And I think, and look, I'm not a scholar who could translate the Bible. I think that's a better translation of the Greek word. Because for me, in our modern English understanding of covet, that makes me think of wanting something that's not mine. Greed makes me think of just wanting. It's avarice, which is an extreme greed for wealth or material gain. It's the word insatiability. It's an attitude that says, when I'm asked how much is enough, just a little bit more. And Jesus is saying, be on your guard against that kind of attitude. And he doesn't give us one, but two examples of it in the text. The first one is the obvious one, and that's the rich man. We'll get to that in a second. The less obvious one is the guy who yells out initially. So, we don't know this for sure because it's not spelled out in the text, but most likely, this is a younger brother. His father has died, and his older brother has received the family inheritance. You see, in those days, wealth was far more likely to be inherited than it was to be earned. And so inheritances were huge deals. It was how a family maintained its social status. And so what the older brother is doing essentially is protecting the family. He's keeping the family's wealth intact. And the younger brother is saying, I don't really care about the family. I want mine. Tell my brother to give me what's mine, regardless of how it affects the other people in my family. So that's number one. Number two is the rich man in the parable. Look with me again at verses 17 to 19. We're going to count, as I read these again, how many personal pronouns this guy uses. 3 sentences. Ready? And he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. Any math nerds? I'll give you the answer. 11. 11 times in 3 sentences, this guy refers to himself. It is a picture of complete self-absorption. He is the center of attention in his own little world. And you can almost hear him, he's talking to himself, right? I mean, I talk to myself, which my wife can attest to. I don't usually talk to myself like this. But he's just talking to himself. You can hear him looking in the mirror and saying, self, you are good enough, and you are smart enough. And golly, people really like you. He is totally absorbed with himself. He has an issue seeing the difference between ownership and stewardship. And Jesus is saying, watch out. Don't be like these two guys. So why? The question before us is why? Why is greed bad? Why is Jesus so concerned with greed? You know, Luke says at the end of his book, if all the things that Jesus said and did, were written down, the world couldn't hold the books that would be written. And so Luke had to be really selective about what he put in his gospel. And he included this. Why? Why is Jesus so concerned about us being greedy? Why is he saying, be on DEFCON level 5 defense against greed? Let's go back to the text. The second principle that I think we get out of this, if you look with me at the second half of verse 15, is this. Life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. So I'm going to get a little bit academic here. That phrase, abundance of his possessions, it's a very technical Greek term that scholars have really debated about, and they have come to the conclusion that a good translation for that would be stuff. And Jesus is saying, your life does not consist in your stuff. That is a radically countercultural idea. That is totally against pretty much everything that America stands for. You know, I've been in the Bay now for 2 months, and I've told people, the Bay feels like America on steroids. All of the good and the bad and the beautiful and the ugly of America just seems to be ramped up here in the Bay, in this little strip of land around the San Francisco Bay. It's amazing. Everything, when we step outside of this building, is screaming at us, your life is valued by your stuff. What kind of shoes do you wear? What kind of clothes do you wear? What kind of car do you drive? How big is the ring on your finger? What kind of watch is that? Where do you vacation? How many houses do you have? How big is your bank account? What's your investment portfolio look like? Our world, our community defines the value of our life by our stuff. And yet here comes Jesus saying, hey, watch out. Your life is not found in your stuff. And then he tells us a parable to prove his point. And I think we get two things out of this parable as we work through it that we can learn about why Jesus says, don't look to your stuff for life. The first one is this: our stuff is not ours. Look with me at verse 16. And he told them a parable, saying, the land of a rich man produced plentifully. Do you see how that sentence is constructed? Do you see what the subject of that sentence is? It's the land. Did this guy plant the seeds, water, harvest? Absolutely. Did he have a business plan and execute on it? Probably. Was it he who made the seed grow? No, it was God. The land produced. Now, Jesus did most of his teaching within the Jewish community. So it's a pretty safe assumption to assume that his audience here, when he's telling this story, is, if not entirely Jewish, probably primarily Jewish. And I think Jesus is making a very strong allusion to an Old Testament text. See, the Old Testament would have been the Jewish Bible back then, and a good Jew would have known it very well. And I think as he's telling this parable, light bulbs are going off in the audience, and they're thinking back to Deuteronomy chapter 8. Now, the context for Deuteronomy chapter 8 is this. The Israelites have been wandering in the desert for 40 years, and they're about to enter the promised land. They've been through a hard season, a generation-long hard season. And Moses is telling them, it's about to get really good. You are going to live in houses you didn't build. You are going to eat crops you didn't plant. And look at what he warns them. This is in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 17 to 19. He says, beware, lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your fathers, as it is today. This rich man in the parable, he forgot who it was that allowed him to get the wealth. And I think the first thing we take out of this parable is that all of our abundance of stuff, all the things we think are ours, it is not really ours. And now, look, there might be some of you who are sitting there saying, hey, Pastor, that's a cute thought. I worked for my stuff. It's my stuff. Look, I got the grades. I got into the university. I got the master's. I got the second master's. Maybe I got the PhD. I work 100 hours a week. My stuff is kind of mine. And so I would ask you this question. Who put clothes on your back and food on your plate and a roof over your head when you were growing up? Who took you to soccer practice and chess club and the Boy Scouts? Who were the donors who funded the scholarships that you had when you went to school? Who are the people who started the company that you work at now? Now, it might be you. Who are the investors that invested in it? Who gave you the mind you have to learn the things that you learn? Who gave you the legs that you have that get you to your work? Who gave you the hands you have that let you do your work? Did you do these things? No. The land produced. The stuff that we have, it is not really ours. And not only is the stuff that we have not really ours, we can't take it with us. Look with me at verse 20. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? The implication being, not yours. As Job says, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will return. As Pastor Brian has said a number of times in the last few weeks, he's done a lot of funerals. He has never seen a U-Haul at any of those funerals. The stuff we accumulate here, that's not really ours to begin with, we can't take it with us when we die. I love road cycling, bicycling. Used to do it a lot. Have actually learned that there's an inverse relationship between time I have to ride my bike and number of children I father. So go figure. We cyclists, and if any of you are a cyclist, this is going to speak to your heart, I know. We have a mathematical formula that we use to determine the correct number of bicycles you should own. It's a simple formula. It's just n plus 1, where n equals the current number of bicycles that you own. The comedian and actor Robin Williams apparently took that formula very much to heart. When he committed suicide in 2014, he had 87 bicycles in his collection. And it will not surprise any of us when I say he didn't take any of them with him. Actually, they were sold in an online auction. It was like an art collection. I sent a link for that auction to a dear friend of mine who also was a cyclist. He's actually the guy who got me into cycling. And you know what he responded by saying? How could you be depressed when you have that many bikes? And isn't that an insightful statement? It's what the guy in our parable thinks. Just a little bit more, then I'll be happy. How could you be depressed with that many bikes? How could you be depressed with that many shoes? With that many pairs of jeans? With that many cars? With that many iPhones? With that much money? And Jesus is saying, you can be depressed with all of those things because it's not where you find life. Life is not found in shoes and jeans and iPhones and bikes and cars and money. What this parable is teaching us is that it's not ours. We can't take it with us. So don't be fools. So what's the remedy? Be rich toward God. Look with me at verse 21. So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. Now, as Jesus so often does in his teaching, he comes in the back door when he gives this parable. You see, to his audience, based on their cultural and theological beliefs, when he started the story off by saying a rich man, they would have thought, blessed. He's got God's favor because he's rich. And what does Jesus do? He calls him a fool. So what is wisdom? If this is foolishness, what is wisdom? Well, first of all, the Bible tells us that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And this guy has no concept for the Lord. Secondly, think back with me to the Old Testament city of Sodom. Many of you will remember the story of Sodom in the Old Testament. Sodom has become known both kind of biblically and culturally as representing just gross moral debauchery, hedonism, and egregious sexual sin. Look at what the prophet Ezekiel says about the city of Sodom and why God, and in Genesis, God destroys the city of Sodom. He rains literally fire from heaven down and destroys the city of Sodom. Look at what the prophet Ezekiel says about the sin of Sodom. This is in Ezekiel chapter 16, verses 49 and 50. Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. They were haughty and did an abomination before me, so I removed them when I saw it. Do you see the part about their sexual sin? Me either. God judged Sodom because they were fat and happy and had excess, and they didn't look out for the people who were in need. The city of Sodom said, let's tear down our barns and build bigger ones to keep all of this extra stuff we have while people were suffering, and that is why God judged them. Look at what the great church father St. Augustine says about the rich fool in our parable. He says, he did not realize that the bellies of the poor are much safer storerooms than his barns. So listen to me, and please get this. This guy in this parable, he is not a fool because he is rich. He is a fool because he is rich towards himself and not towards God. And let's just talk for a minute about what his greediness looks like. You see, most of us can recognize greed when it is rampant accumulating. It's easy to see someone who just buys and buys and buys more and think, oh, they're kind of greedy. What is much more subtle is hoarding. And that seems to be the primary expression of this guy's greed. Yeah, the whole like eat, drink, and be merry, that might insinuate some kind of collecting of stuff. But really what is right in the center of Jesus' crosshairs in this parable are huge savings accounts and huge endowments. Brian talked last week, and I think it is so appropriate about a financial finish line. And this is subtle for us, right? Because buying a lot is irresponsible, but saving a lot is responsible. I'm not sure that that's what this text is telling us. And if I can illustrate it, I hope Brian's okay with this. As we talked about this passage, he told me this. He sits on the board of a university, and he said one of the tension points he has introduced on that board is this endowment thinking, saying if Jesus comes back tomorrow, is he going to be happy that we have a 9-figure endowment while people all over the world are suffering because they don't have enough to eat? And I don't want this to devolve into a social justice sermon. That's not where I'm taking it. But Jesus was about social justice, and so we need to be as well. We have to learn to say enough to spending, and I think we need to learn to say enough to saving. I think there's a point where we step out in faith and stop continually hoarding. Not a lot of amens in today's sermon, but I'll take that one. A lot of you have heard our story, and I'm not going to rehash it again, but I spent 11 years in business through just a whole set of circumstances and personal convictions, felt like God was calling us to full-time ministry. So 3 years ago, quit my job to head to seminary. At the time, I was working in finance in Cleveland. I went to seminary in Boston. So full-time employee in finance in Cleveland, full-time student in Boston. We lost about 75% of our living space in that move, which was a bitter pill to swallow. That summer before we moved, my blessed wife took it upon herself, because we had to sell as much of our stuff as she possibly could. All summer long on Craigslist and Facebook and mommy stuff for sale and whatever it is. You name it, she tried to sell it. Furniture, clothes, toys, decorations, who knows what else. At the end of the summer, that culminated in a big yard sale that we did. All told, after the yard sale and 2 or 3 months of selling all of our stuff, she made about $5,000. It was a lot of stuff. That week after that yard sale, she was at the grocery store. Earlier in the summer, we were involved in a ministry called Young Lives, which is a division of Young Life, which is a ministry to high school moms. And they had a ministry going in East Cleveland to high school-age girls who were moms. And they had put out a prayer request for a van because they held these meetings twice a month, but these girls either didn't have driver's licenses or didn't have cars, or no one in their family was willing to take them there. And they wanted a van to go pick them up to bring them to their gatherings. Beth's at the grocery store the week after that yard sale, and there in the parking lot is an 18-passenger van, asking price $4,000. You can see where this is going. She comes home, and she tells me that she wants to use our yard sale money to buy a van for Young Lives. And I'm like, sweet Beth. I just quit my job. We're looking at 3 years of no income. This is rent money. This is grocery money. This is insurance money. This is our money. And we bought the van for Young Lives. And for the last 3 years, twice a month, high school-age moms in East Cleveland have been picked up and taken to a place where they and their babies are loved on, and they're told the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because my wife chose to be rich toward God and not to herself. Now listen, if what was implicit in that story didn't land, let me make it explicit. I was the fool. I was the one who got the money and thought, I think we should make a bigger barn to hold all this money that we just got. And my wife was the one who was like, I think we should give it away. Look back with me now at verse 20. Actually, before we go there, let me set it up. Up to this point, I think there are a few of us, some of us in this room, who this message is hitting, right? God has blessed us financially. I use us very loosely. We have abundance. We have excess. Maybe it's even convicting. But I suspect there's a whole lot of us in this room, despite the statistics I gave at the beginning, which everyone knows 95% of statistics are made up anyway. Those weren't. Despite those statistics, is sitting here thinking, this sounds really good, and I know some rich people who have a lot, and they should be giving more than they are, but that is not me. I'm a student. I'm a single mom. I'm a single dad. If there was a rung on the corporate ladder that was below ground, that's the one that I would be on. This doesn't hit home for me. I got a word for you too. Look back with me at verse 20. But God said to him, "Fool, this night your soul is required of you." Look at that word, required. It's used one other time in Luke, and in that instance, it's translated demanded back. You see, this verb in Greek carries an economic connotation. It's the same verb that would be used for a loan that had been lent out and was now being called in. So don't miss this. It wasn't just this guy's crops and his barns and his stuff that was not his. His very life was on loan from God. And that night, God was saying, I'm calling the loan in. So listen, is this passage about money? For sure. But it's about more than money. It's about your time. It's about your resources. It's about your very life. It is not yours. It is on loan from God, and someday he's going to call it back. Jesus is saying in this parable, don't be greedy. Be rich toward God. It's not yours. You can't keep it. So don't be a fool. This is primarily an issue of the heart. It's not primarily an issue of the checkbook. And what I mean by that is this. If you leave here and your thought going out is, man, I just got to figure out a way to be a little bit more generous. If your thought is behavior modification, how long is that going to last? How long did your last diet last? A few months, a few weeks, a few days, a few hours? This is a heart issue. The way to become radically generous towards God is to reorient where you go to find life. When we recognize who Jesus is and what he has done, that he died on a cross in our place, paid a penalty that we could never pay, so that we could be reconciled to God and spend eternity in paradise with him. The question goes from how much should I give to how much can I give? You will long to give more when you recognize who Jesus is and what he has done. So when Jesus says, don't find your life in stuff, it's because he knows where to find life, and it's in him. Your life is not found in your stuff because your life is found in Jesus Christ. And when that reality hits home, being radically generous is the natural outflow of a heart that is oriented toward Christ. Now, this is where it gets a little bit practical, and so bear with me. For some of you, this is going to be, yep, Pastor, I know that. For others of you, this is going to be new. If you are sitting there thinking, what would it look like for me to be generous towards God? How could I change? How could I do something different than what I've been doing to be generous? The first place I would start is with your tithe, with tithing. So this biblical principle of tithing is the idea that 10%, at least, kind of at the start, the minimum, 10% of what you make goes to God. The principle is clear in Scripture. There's some gray around how does that actually play out. You would be amazed at the statistics on tithing in churches. In the average church, 10 to 25% of the people give. That means 75 to 90 don't. And of that 10 to 25%, they give it an average rate of 2.5%. Now listen to me when I say this. I do not know what the giving looks like in this church. I don't know who gives. I don't know how much. I don't want to know. I won't ever know how much people give. That is not why I am saying this. But I'm saying if you are thinking, how can I be generous towards God? That is the place to start. And I think, just some principles, I think 10% is the floor, not the ceiling. I think that's the starting point. And here's the other one that's really a bitter pill to swallow. I will never forget talking to my parents after I got my first job about tithing. And I was like, now this is on the net, right? And they were like, nah, not in our book. I think you tithe on the gross. Now, we can debate later. If you have an issue with that, send an email to Pastor Brian at alcf.net. But tithing is the place to start. And if you're sitting there thinking, I can't afford that, my encouragement to you today is try it. Don't put the Lord your God to the test, but test him. Step out in faith and see if he won't provide for every need by obeying him in what he has given us. It is a joy to give. I encourage you to enter into that. Secondly, if you feel like you're good on tithing, and we at this church, we are huge believers in missions. There are missionaries all over this world who would love to have your financial, relational, and prayer support. And in fact, there are missionaries in our very congregation who are doing God's work here in the Bay who would love to have your support, and I would be happy to connect you with them. Cheryl DeGree is on staff. She directs our Compassion and Justice Ministries. She does amazing work with a whole host of ministries here right in our backyard that are ministering to the least of these. I would love to connect you with her if you want to start giving to something like that, not just with your money, but with your time and your talents. And then lastly, a couple times a week, I drive past eBay's headquarters. And can I tell you the first thought that comes into my mind every time I go past that place? I wish I'd thought of that. What an amazing idea. Let's use the internet to create an online marketplace where people bid against each other for the junk other people don't want. You would be amazed at what you can find on eBay. You would be amazed at what you can sell on eBay. And so I encourage you this week, if you have an eBay account, fire it back up. If you don't, talk to your kids. They'll help you set one up. Take a couple pictures of some stuff that's in your house that you will not even notice if it is gone. List it, take in the proceeds, and instead of keeping them for yourself, invest them in the kingdom. Those are just 3 really practical ways I think that you could be rich towards God this week. The catch is, all of them are going to ask you to do something different this week than you've done in previous weeks. And that's going to take some initiative. All right. As Brian says, let's go home on this. Cormac and the worship team can come as I start to wrap this up. I want to circle back to the Deuteronomy 8 context that I talked about earlier. You remember that the Israelites have been wandering the desert for 40 years. They have literally been camping in the sand and eating the same flourless bread for an entire generation. And Moses is telling them in this chapter, the hard time is about to end, and it's about to get really good, really good. Listen to how he describes it. This is earlier on in chapter 8 of Deuteronomy, starting in verse 7. And just as I'm reading this, think about how this would sound if you had been wandering in the desert for 40 years. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs, flowing out in the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey, a land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron and out of whose hills you can dig copper. You shall eat and be full, and you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Moses is saying, endure just a little bit longer, and you're going to enter paradise. Now hold that image in your mind while I tell you this story. The church that we went to while I was in seminary, the senior pastor told a story one time about a guy who had interned for him many years prior. Like me, that guy had been working on a seminary degree at Gordon Conwell, and he spent a couple years as the youth pastor at this guy's church. And the senior pastor said that he drove the crummiest car he had ever seen in his entire life, that he feared for his safety every time he left the church. And the whole time he was there, he tried to get him a raise. It just was never in the budget to get him more money. And as his time as the youth pastor at that church ended, the senior pastor told him this and said, man, I have just felt so bad about how little we've been paying you, and I wish that we could have given you more. And the youth pastor responded and said, don't worry about it. I'm taken care of. It turns out his parents owned the largest organic foods company on the West Coast. He was an heir to a multiple $million-dollar fortune. And so the kind of car that he drove or the size of his paycheck didn't really matter to him that much because he had a huge inheritance coming. Listen to me. If you are in Christ, as Paul tells us in Galatians 3, if you are in Christ, you are a child of Abraham, and you are an heir to the promise. Listen, if you are in Christ, you are a child of the King, and you have an enormous inheritance coming. How can we be rich towards God in this life? It's knowing that we are children of the King, and we are filthy rich. Being rich towards God is the natural outflow of a heart that is oriented to eternity. It's not yours. You can't keep it. So don't be a fool.
Davidson, and here's what's going on at Abundant Life. October is our month to celebrate one of our 5 core values, gathering, which defines who we are and what we do as a church. Throughout Gathering Month, you'll have great opportunities to connect with members of the ALCF community as we work together developing a deeper relationship with Christ. And what better way to gather and connect than through a shared worship experience? On Saturday, October 20th, our very own worship leader, Cormac Parker, celebrates the official release of his first EP, Amazed, with a free concert and reception right here at ALCF. From 6:30 to 7:30 p.m., join us for an amazing time of praise and worship. Please RSVP to CormacParkerJr.com. If you're 18 to 30-ish and looking to go deeper in your walk with a community of young adult believers, or you're not yet a believer and would like to learn about God's plan for your life, come check us out at our growth group, midweek fellowship, and young adult women's gatherings. You'll have a chance to hang out in a relaxed environment filled with games, events, speakers, informal discussions, and much, much more. To connect with our young adult community, email ya@alcf.net or yaw@alcf.net, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Moms, get ready for our upcoming Moms Time Out gatherings taking place on October 11th and 25th from 10 a.m. to noon in the fellowship hall. Moms with kids in the home can gain encouragement from one another and together learn how to glorify God in the midst of daily circumstances. Meetings include Bible-based teaching and encouragement, discussion and prayer with mentor moms, worship, brunch, and fellowship. Sign up in advance for childcare. Be sure to join us for our Seniors Night Out on Friday, October 12th from 6:30 to 9 p.m. in the fellowship hall. It's a great opportunity to meet and bond with other 50-plus seniors for a memorable night of meaningful fellowship with delicious food, a message from Rich Young, and worship led by Dave and Julie Raines. The cost is $15 in advance and registration is required. For more information, contact seniors@alcf.net. The theme for our next couples night out is Tools for Your Marriage Toolbox. Make plans to join the Harveys to discover the many tools that the Lord has provided to help you stay connected to your spouse and grow your marriage according to His plan. We'll unpack some of these tools over dinner with married couples on Saturday, October 13th from 5:30 to 8 p.m. in the fellowship hall. The cost is $40 per couple. Childcare is available with pre-registration. Our next singles movie night features The Shack, a movie in which a man who falls into deep depression after suffering a family tragedy leaves him questioning his innermost beliefs. Come join us on Friday, October 26th from 6 to 9 p.m. in the fellowship hall for this riveting and inspiring movie. The cost is just $10 and it includes food, but registration is required. Have you ever wondered what your kids are doing at Safari Kids after you drop them off? Here's a chance to experience a taste of SK during their open house on Sunday, October 28th from 10 to 11:30 a.m. Whether it's just a few minutes or the entire service, you're welcome to come join us for as long as you like. In addition to the huddle, we'll have 3 men's groups that meet on Tuesdays where men can connect, bond, and grow in Christ together. Contact men@alcf.net for more information. Our Spanish-speaking growth group is a time of family-friendly fellowship, studying the Word, and prayer. Join Arcadio and Magda Ramos in their home on Fridays from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. For more information, contact SpanishGroup@alcf.net. And to sign up for any of these upcoming gatherings, go to alcf.net/signups or use the ALCF app. In addition, check out our bi-weekly emails, newsletter, and social media to stay connected to everything ALCF. And remember, at ALCF, our goal is to make a difference in your life so that you can make a difference in the lives of the people in your sphere of influence. Or like we say around here, abundant life exists to make a better you for a better world.